Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join you all here today. I'm going to start off sort of challenging the premise of this discussion, and that is the collapse of Afghanistan. And let me introduce that challenge with two questions. On 9/11, September 11th, 2001, who was the government in Afghanistan? Who was ruling Afghanistan? That's a rhetorical question. And the second question is, on 9/11/2021, today, 20 years later, who is the government in Afghanistan? Who is ruling Afghanistan? Is that a collapse? I think you might call it a rebirth of Afghanistan. And I'll just let that ferment and think about it as we talk about the other points I'd like to introduce. So I guess the most another question that is extremely important in this discussion as we consider the collapse of Afghanistan and its implications for regional security is it was the U.S. that made the changes. The U.S. and the allies, NATO and others, that made the changes that created the new government, and then that new government collapsed and returned to the Taliban. What was the U.S. doing in Afghanistan in October of 2001? What were the goals? What were the goals of U.S. involvement, U.S. attacks, U.S. invasion of Afghanistan? At the time, it seemed that our goals were very clear and very focused, that we were responding to an attack on our homeland, multiple attacks by terrorists in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. We pretty quickly made the assumption to begin with, and then an analysis, and decided that this was an Al-Qaeda attack and that Osama bin Laden, based in Afghanistan, was responsible for the attacks on the U.S., the terrorist attacks of 9/11. So at that time, as we began our involvement in Afghanistan, as we prepared to invade, as we prepared to use military intelligence, covert and overt force against Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups that were affiliated with Al-Qaeda, it was pretty clear what our goals were and what we were doing there. Maybe we lost that focus pretty quickly. I think that if we had kept that focus and gone, if our goal was to find and arrest Osama bin Laden, for example, if we had kept that focus and thrown all of our resources, military, intelligence, diplomatic, in all the faith and credit of the United States into that specific mission to find, arrest, and or eliminate Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, we'd be having a very different conversation 19 years later today. For some reason, when we had probably most of Al-Qaeda and the leadership isolated in Tora Bora, we didn't throw a full military, our full military might into that effort, into that battle, into that area Instead, for some reason, we held back, and they were able to escape. It was as Al-Qaeda fled Tora Bora is, I think, where the whole thing went wrong, where America's involvement in Afghanistan went wrong. Because from that very clear tactical and strategic goal of finding, arresting, eliminating Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, what did our goals become? Nation building, spreading democracy, and it just metastasized from there. Once we were there a year, once we overthrew the Taliban, and we were there a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, the goals just, the reasons, the rationale to keep Americans and American forces in Afghanistan continued to grow. Nation building, spreading democracy, building civic, military, and security capabilities, training their provincial governments, training their police force, training their military, training their intelligence services. Layer on top of all that training, layer on top of all of that building capabilities, I believe that it was where we really went wrong, and that was trying to impose American values, current American values on this country that we had destroyed and taken out their government. So not only were we training them in sort of the philosophy, the strategy and tactics of security, intelligence, and military, but we were imposing values that were foreign to them, very foreign to them. And you can argue whether that's good or bad or what's right or wrong, but the fact is that the values that we tried to impose on them were foreign. And the vast majority, if you want to talk about building democracy, we pretty much just ignored the majority's point of view, the majority's culture, and we tried to impose American values on them. And all of these became the goals of the U.S. government's effort in Afghanistan. And I think that's really where the whole thing went wrong. The withdrawal and the collapse was just the final. It was a rotten edifice just waiting for somebody to give it a kick, and the whole thing would fall down. No matter who was in charge of our withdrawal, which had to come at some point or another, it was going to happen like that. It was not going to be smooth. It was not going to be, there would be casualties, there would be chaos. Back to the actual, where it went wrong during the occupation and during the nation building. What were our tactics? What was the American and American allies, NATO and others' tactics in Afghanistan? Drone strikes, very effective. We can, and very low risk. You can have somebody sitting in Colorado in the middle of the United States flying a huge drone with a Hellfire missile on it, and you can shoot that missile into a specific doorway of a specific building anywhere in Afghanistan, or you can shoot it up the exhaust pipe of a truck anywhere in Afghanistan. Very low risk. The person flying that drone in Colorado is not at any risk whatsoever. However, as we saw in the last drone strike, that was an attempt to retaliate for the suicide bombing at the airport, it apparently was totally mistargeted. bad analysis led to targeting an innocent family. And we're hearing quite a bit about that, but the fact is that it's very likely that many of the drone strikes that we carried out over the last 20 years were similar to that. And even if the target was right, there were people, there were many times there were collateral damage is a nice way to call it, to nice term to use, but it's civilians who were killed. And all that does is empower and enable and motivate people to be against the US and the US's allies. So as we're supposedly building the country, building the nation, spreading democracy, imposing American values, we're carrying out drone strikes constantly. Midnight raids, special forces kicking in doors, snatching people, other bombings, B-52 bombings, didn't help us, didn't help the government of Afghanistan that we built there. So as this whole occupation and nation building effort carried out, unfolded over the last 20 years, I guess a question to ask is who benefited? Who benefited from this? Afghanistan, it was like a full circle. It was like chasing its tail. Went from Taliban in 2001, Taliban 2021. In between, in those 20 years, the United States, I believe the most recent number I've heard is $7 trillion. I may be off $1 trillion or two there. That's a lot of money. And the United States right now has massive problems, economic problems, social problems. Our southern border is porous. It is something like 2 million illegal aliens enter the United States a month or within the last several months. We have huge problems. There's a OxyContin opioid abuse epidemic. People are dying by the thousands. Did the United States benefit from the trillions of dollars that we spent setting up Afghanistan for the Taliban to take back over? I don't think so, but I don't know. Did we? Did Europe benefit from all those efforts there? Did NATO partners? Did Afghanistan benefit from our actions there and the trillions of dollars we spent? And I don't know the answer. My opinion is I do not think the US, we got nothing out of it. Except our original goal was to chase Al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan. We did that, but then as the occupation continued, I'm not sure there was any benefit. If we look at the region, it's really interesting, and Baker covered a little bit of it, but I like to go back even farther in history. Well, and you can go back to Alexander the Great, was driven back in Afghanistan. But if you a little closer, Afghanistan was the ground on which the great game, they called it, was played. The great game was was jockeying for position and for power and for control of resources between Russia and the European colonial powers, the UK, Britain, France, and others. So who is in power in Afghanistan and who is jockeying for influence and who's gaining influence is a literally centuries old game that's been played. And the United States jumped into it kind of like a huge brain damaged child, totally ignored all of the millennia of history that we stumbled onto. And now as we stumble out, it goes back to the great game: China, Russia, India, Pakistan, Israel, the European powers, Turkey, of course. Turkey is right there. The European powers have always had interests, the ex-colonial powers. So I guess the answer to the implication to regional security is the implication is what goes around comes around. Not only have we gone from 9/11/2001 to 9/11/2021, we've gone from 1700 to 2100 to the 2000s. It's the more things change, the more they stay the same. I'd kind of wrap up with a couple more, a couple questions, and I'd like to also leave some thoughts about the implications of what's just happened in the last 20 years in Afghanistan and what's just happened in the last couple of weeks in Afghanistan. What are the implications for the Philippines and Southeast Asia and East Asia at large? And I guess the questions are, how long can, excuse me, the U.S. afford to be the policeman of the world? I think, as I mentioned, it's a huge cost in Afghanistan and Iraq and the other Middle Eastern and North African countries that we've meddled in since 9/11. How long can we afford to do that? And how much longer can the U.S. keep up a presence in Southeast Asia and East Asia? It hasn't worked out really well for the U.S. There aren't a lot of benefits. And at some point, there's going to be a reckoning. There's going to be a profit loss statement. And for the Philippines, I guess the implications for regional security is, who is your regional friend now? Who can help you out and who can you count on? And I'll leave it there.